Hello, it is the end of the year 2020, the year that had the whole world doing cartwheels. For those who have been with us since the very beginning, we appreciate you so much. If you are new here, welcome to the Leaders of Africa family. We are excited to have you. If you're joining us live or after the fact, welcome to this week with a twist. It is the year in review. This shindig goes down every bi-weekly Saturday at 2 p.m. UTC, 3 p.m. West African, 4 p.m. Central, and 5 p.m. East African. We chat about current events ranging from pop culture to politics from across the continent. This means everything from serious to comical. However, because it's the end of the year, we are here, and yes, you got that right, on a Wednesday. Instead of the week's news, we'll be highlighting our top stories of the year, so we are thrilled that you could join us for 2020's last episode of this week. COVID has obviously been the biggest story of the year, and we'll be highlighting it as we go along. We welcome you to engage with us in the comments or at leadersofafrica.org/live. Join our Discord community, and of course, hit that subscribe button down below to subscribe to the Leaders of Africa on YouTube. Oh, and did I mention when you subscribe, hit that notification bell so you always know when we have new content. My name is Violet, and I'm your host today. And here with me are my regular co-conspirators. Guys, we made it to the end of 2020. Congratulations.
We did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Perhaps barely, but we're here.
Yeah, it's not almost over. One more day to go.
Praise, how do you feel about 2020 coming to an end? Gloria?
Wow,
One praise.
exhausting. That's all I can think about. It's been a year and a half. There's a lot
Wow.
that went down this year, and I'm just grateful to be actually here today on the almost the second last day of 2020.
Absolutely. Ghana, in one phrase, how do you feel about the end of 2020?
It's almost over.
That's
Yeah, it's almost over. It's been a lot for everybody this year. We thank God
right.
that we're still alive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Peter, how about yourself?
Yeah, for me, it's been a tale of two parts of the year. The first part was very short, and we can hardly remember. That is January, February. And then there was March onward. And it's been a very long year. It's been an interesting year. There have been a lot of innovations and education and the use of technology, just as we're using here today. But overall, It's been a very rough and difficult year for us and for everyone around the globe.
Well, Eva, I see you. Peter, what have been your top 3 stories of the year?
Yeah, so we're counting down our top 3 stories here. And so I was asked to come up with my top 3 stories. I'll start with my number 3. And my number 3, and I'm sure it's on everybody's list, and we just sort of briefly talked about it, is COVID-19, and specifically the COVID-19 lockdowns that we saw. And that we saw those in Western Europe and in Europe broadly speaking. In the United States, we also saw those in varying different forms across the African continent, ranging from Nigeria to Zimbabwe, for example. So I would put COVID-19 lockdowns on my top 3 at number 3, sort of a prominent thing of the year. My number 2, and we talked about this on the show before, my number 2 would be the NSARS protests, because they were a really big focal point for discussion in Nigeria, but not just Nigeria, but involved a conversation with the diaspora as well about not only issues of police brutality in Nigeria, but the larger context of social and economic inequality, of the procurement of state public goods and things of this nature. So I would put that number 2 because it resonated globally. And my number 1, which we can talk about, my number 1 is actually poor elections in Guinea, Tanzania, and Cote d'Ivoire. So I'm sort of going across the board on poor elections here. And I think that is my number 1.
Guy.
Yeah, I think that's my number 1, not only because I'm interested in elections, but It's a common trend across the globe,
Right.
not just on the African continent, but we also see disputed elections in the United States, not necessarily flawed elections electorally, but those that were disputed by one party or another. And I think
Right.
it's not just a sort of a one-off, concern with one election. So an election in Guinea or Tanzania, but it shows a broader concern with this decline of democracy that we've been seeing over a number of years across countries. Also, the
Yeah.
norms of democracy are eroding in those countries that have experimented with democracy, including what I would say is the biggest underlying concern here, which is this third term norm that was there. Across the continent, there was increasingly an embrace that, presidents should serve only 2 terms, right? And we've seen that broken here and there. But I think in this year, particularly in the case of Cote d'Ivoire, we've seen that norm that was being enshrined in ECOWAS in West Africa being broken. And we also see sort of weak oppositions in these countries. So I think as we look past perhaps COVID-19, which we'll talk about later, I think our biggest concern and my big story is that solidification of that decline of democracy, not only across the African continent, but arguably worldwide. And so that would be my number one, not necessarily news specific story, but trend or theme of 2020.
Right. Wow. It's really, really interesting. And yes, indeed, it's been a big theme across the globe, from the United States, to the African continent, South America, and other parts of the world. I wonder, does anyone have anything to say about this? Because it's really been on the headlines lately, including pastors becoming president. Yes. Right. Well, Peter, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm curious to know, of all these countries that you mentioned where all these elections took place, is there one that stands out the most for you, or that had the most unique outstay that you think is highlight as we close down 2020?
I mean, I would say the Ivorian elections were very unique, mainly
Okay,
because there was another story involved where the current president, Alassane Ouattara, had sort of chosen a successor, right? So he wasn't necessarily going to be running for a third term, but that successor up and died unexpectedly, and then he took back the mantle of the party. So we could say that it was an interesting confluence of events that led to this result. Although I think it belies the larger point that Alassane Ouattara did want to seek a third term in these elections. So I would say Cote d'Ivoire is very unique in that respect. I would also say it's quite interesting, but not unique in the sense that opposition was largely absent from the conversation surrounding elections, right? And so there have been, a number of opposition parties that have historically boycotted elections or asked their supporters to stay home or engage in the process in sort of what we would say is not a normal electoral way. We saw a bit of that in Cote d'Ivoire as well. So I'd say Cote d'Ivoire sticks out, and it also sticks out, as I said, in being an ECOWAS country. And we oftentimes think about ECOWAS being the region where norms around turnovers of power, of term limits, is sort of far in advanced the other regions across the continent, right? And in East Africa, certainly. In Southern Africa, you've got more of this sort of not necessarily an issue of term limits, but an issue of or sort of election quality surrounding liberation parties, for example. So West Africa has sort of been the innovator in this respect, and is sort of seen very highly across the continent as ones that have emphasized those norms. But we're beginning to see those cracks form even in the ECOWAS region, right? In Cote d'Ivoire being the major one, and I also would suggest Guinea as well. So I spell some emerging troubling trends for a region that had made great strides, I think, in these regional norms of protecting quality elections and turnovers of power.
Absolutely agreed. Oh, and is that the guy who reset the electoral button back to reset?
I don't know. I had not heard that one.
There was someone who.
Oh yeah, the electoral reset. So when the Constitution, to some degree, So with this whole concept that when you inaugurate a new constitution, you reset your term, right? Yeah, so there was a little bit of that, right? And so in 2016, I believe in Cote d'Ivoire, they rewrote a new constitution. So they say, well, we've now sort of reset the clock in a sense. So pay attention to that, because that's one that we're going to see in other countries as well. You need to sort of overhaul your constitution, and then you sort of refresh the country, refresh the term rate. So I think that's what you're getting at there, Violet. Pressing the reset button.
Actually, I was surprised that ECOWAS let that go. I mean, they allowed Cote d'Ivoire to, elect a
Get away
president for
with
a
it.
third term. And I was trying to say this is going to set an example for other countries, as you said, that other countries will come in and decide to reset their constitution for their leaders to lead. And for me, it's really concerning. And actually, I feel like this year we also have seen the erosion of democracy on the continent. There have been election, there have been a number of electoral crises. I mean, election decline, and even in the case of Ghana that had an election recently, there have been a number of issues that have cropped up. So, moving
Right.
forward, I just hope that ECOWAS, stand firm. To be able to tell its regional body to follow the norms that they've been used to and not change it to suit, their own parties, or to elect a president for a third term, which I feel like is not setting a good example. In cases like this, then the opposition party is lagging behind, because if they are not in power, they don't have that kind of mandate to reset the constitution or push in agendas that will favor them. Then they are going to remain in opposition. But in the case of
Absolutely.
democracy, free and fair, everybody or every party have to have the chance or the opportunity to run the country when their time comes or when they are voted into power. So leaders trying to
Absolutely.
reset patterns, reset norms to favor them, I just feel like that is a dangerous precedent. And this is something that moving forward, African countries have to devote themselves to work on it, not to repeat something
Right.
like this again.
Yeah, Eva's right on. I've just put on the screen there the Electoral Democracy Index. This comes from the Varieties of Democracy project. So you can see this is the overall Africa trend. And you can see in recent years, it's sort of plateaued. You can see that plateau, and perhaps in the most recent years, that decline. So it's been a big debate amongst experts and analysts whether there really has been a decline or whether it's sort of reached this period of plateau, which is also concerning, right? We don't want to just sort of sit on that plateau. But as Eva mentioned, it's really interesting that they've let this precedent stand in a way that, ECOWAS in particular in West Africa has been pretty tough when it comes to the quality of elections and pushing actors to really come together and to right some of these issues.
I just
Absolutely.
want to add one thing on that. I would say that bodies like ECOWAS, we don't have to wait for a situation like what we currently saw in Cote d'Ivoire, because last elections in Cote d'Ivoire were disputed. And I think issues of election need to be tackled earlier on. We don't have to wait when we have a president running for a third term to step in. I think organizations sort of have to anticipate these moves. You have to watch elections closely and not wait for the moment where we are in. They could have stepped in Cote d'Ivoire last time. There was a significant, dispute during last elections, and I think it was a missed opportunity for them to step in, and that's what gave us what we have.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So to
Can I
me,
even
the
say
concern, to me, the concern is this: it's about the institutions on the continent that should be, ensuring that the crisis we are experiencing with democracy are being put in check. And
Right.
I think this is where I'm a little bit concerned Because just like Peter mentioned, democracy is experiencing some forms of struggles here and there in different African countries. And 2020 has been a major one that is concerning to everyone. And when I think about this, I've always suspected this, that nothing is going to remain without being troubled forever. But the
Right.
capability or the institutions that can help put things in, in check to respond adequately to crisis is what I've always worried about. Do we have these institutions doing their job? The media houses in Africa, are they doing their job? Do we have the non-governmental civil society organizations doing their job? It's not just about making noise or collaborating with our colleagues internationally, but it's also about creating that awareness, citizens engagement, that is necessary for some of these things, to be checkmated. And you can see this in
Right.
the US. Everybody has always looked up to the US for as a model of democracy. But this year, democracy is not in the US, we know what the
Right.
has regarding the election. There's an allegation of rigging of the election. Somebody refusing to follow the tradition of saying that I've considered defeat, and I think this is signals to different part of the world, including Africa, and part of that threat that we are beginning to see in terms of democracy being troubled and institutions meant that we expect to do the needful, not doing the needful. So, and that may mean we need to strengthen our institutions locally in Africa, particularly the civil
Absolutely.
society organization. And civil society organizations, to me, they need to do more citizen engagement by making citizens understand what is necessary for them to do for democracy not to be at risk. Because at the end of the
Right.
day, democracy is about the citizens. It's about their voices. It's about their powers. And it's about them rising up to defend democracy when there is a need to do so. But if the citizens are not convinced or are not poorly educated about their role in a democracy, then we might begin to be, concerned that there is a major trouble on the horizon. But that's it. I'm very
Absolutely. Ghana.
about the
All
future of
right. Thank
democracy, in Africa, and that's where it is for me now.
I totally. Oh, well, Eva, bless us with your top stories of 2020.
Wow. So 2020 has been very interesting, as all of you have indicated that COVID has been one of the top stories. For me, I want to, COVID is number three, but I'm looking at specifically researchers trying to figure out why African countries were not hard hit by COVID-19. And that was really interesting. All sorts of
That's a
theories
very
came
big,
out, and
mysterious story.
yeah, you saw the BBC has to change their the title of their one of their articles because the way it described the situation on the content was displeasing, and people raised a concern. They came out to apologize, but most researchers are still trying to figure out why most countries on the continent were not hard hit. And actually, when you go to Ghana and places like Uganda, it looks like life have returned to normal, and still COVID-19 those countries are really low. One of the arguments is that probably the government is not taking good records or good data on COVID cases. And also the other argument that has come about is because of the youthful nature of the citizens, right? And we all know that Africa is a very young continent. So people are still trying, researchers are still trying to figure out why a lot of countries on the continent are not really hard hit, despite the fact that they have their hospitals and also their health systems are not really strong to be able to contain it. And that has been an interesting case.
Yeah,
My
and just
second
jumping in there, Eva. But there have been a few high-profile folks that have passed on due to COVID-19 too, right? I think Ghana. We may have talked about this on an earlier show, but the chief of staff of Buhari passed on. There were also rumors of this being the cause of the death of the former president of Burundi, Pierre Nkurunziza, as well. And so there have been some some high profile folks that have died, despite, as you said, Eva, this sort of interesting puzzle why we see lower case numbers and also lower death rates, perhaps. Yeah, go on, Eva. I just wanted to dive in on that one.
Yeah, but these are really few cases. And also, if you look at the number of deaths on the continent, is really few compared to the United States and other places too on the continent. So that is something that they are trying to figure out, because you guys remember that when COVID hit Africa, when COVID started, there were a lot of news about how people are going to die in Africa, how Africa is not going to be able to manage it and handle it. But on the other hand, Africa has been the country that has been able to pull through and also done a good job, because they have experience managing pandemic and other health crisis. So that really came into display, and so number of innovations there. So kudos to African countries, and I hope that you continue to take precaution and people continue to do what is right so that we are able to contain this virus. The other
I guess I'll
topic I
answer
want to
the law. Okay.
talk about, yep. The other thing I want to talk about has to do with Rwanda. We've been hearing a lot of cases on Rwanda or news on Rwanda that has to do with the current administration indicting or persecuting Rwanda nationals who are abroad for issues of terrorism charges and things like that. And some of them have to be related to genocide that took place about in the 90s. So the reason one that came in this year that also raised international outrage has to do with the Hotel Rwanda guy, Paul Resisabagina. He was arrested in Dubai, and people were trying to understand why he was arrested, and also the charges against him has to do with terrorism cases and terrorism charges. The government that is sponsoring extremist group somewhere in Rwanda and also in the DRC. So we don't actually know the clear story around it. So he's currently going through trials, and there has not been much information. Actually, none that I know of what is going on, whether he's been released or he's been granted bail. So that is something that has been really troubling in terms of Rwanda nationals being arrested abroad or being arrested for cases related to terrorism. And we also know that the opposition party in Rwanda, most people that try to contest in election in Rwanda don't find it very easy. Most of the
Right.
people who election end up being arrested, thrown into jail, or being disqualified. So there's also this issue of Paul Kagame using, dictatorship tactics to rule the country and things like that. So I just hope that Paul, the cases against him will be dropped as we move forward. Thanks. And my first topic also has to do with the arrest and intimidation of journalists. I mean, as you know, 2020 has hit us with a lot of challenges. Apart from
Absolutely.
that, some leaders or some dictators have taken opportunities to crack down on journalists. I mean, in various countries, even here in the US, we've heard about journalists being questioned, the media being called fake news, all sorts of rhetorics
Right.
against the work of journalism. So in the case of Rwanda, there was this guy, this prominent journalist called Hopo Chinono. Hopo Chinono, somewhere in August, released an expose about a health minister or corruption surrounding COVID-19 suppliers. So because he was arrested for exposing this corruption going on pertaining to money for COVID-19, and the government was not happy about it. Although at the end
Wow.
of the day, the health minister was sacked from his office, but the journalist ended up going to jail. And for me, it's
Wow.
really surprising because we need journalists to do this kind of job for us. The government cannot do everything. So when we have investigative journalists doing some of these things, we rather need to applaud them for exposing the rot in our system. But rather, what happens is that some of these leaders are trying to crack down on them when they come out with any issues that exposes their corruption or how corrupt the administration are. they start to hate on journalists, to send warning to any journalist who want to do something like that. So that also raised a lot of international outrage. And it's not just in Zimbabwe that journalists has faced intimidation. Even in the case of Ghana, during this election or something, like recently, most journalists in Ghana are being threatened or something like that by people. People are sending them death threats and things for talking against corruption in the country or the government and things like that. And we've seen this worldwide, which is really, really not in the best situation, because we also need strong media institution to be able to tell us, tell ordinary citizens what is going on, what the government is doing. Like the media become like an oversight on the work of the government to report it to citizens, because we, the
I agree.
citizens, are them there. So if we don't know what is going on behind the scene, then we are kept in ignorance. So we need journalists to be exposing some of these things. But in this 2020, sorry, we also seeing leaders trying to crack down on journalists and their work. So I just hope that as we move forward, um, uh, more of these stories will come out, because we need to build a stronger African continent, and we also need the media.
Right.
We also need journalists to do their job. So as we move forward, I hope that we will not hear journalists being arrested or being threatened or killed for doing a simple their job.
Yeah, on your
Right.
screen
Actually,
is Reporters Without Borders. So it's one of the organization that sort of reports on issues surrounding journalism around the world, and in particular, their sort of index of freedom of the press and sort of the ability for journalists to operate here. As you could probably guess, the lighter shades of yellow are on the freer end of the spectrum, and the darker colors into the reds are sort of the most concerning environments there. As
right.
Eva mentioned, Zimbabwe's sort of a dark red there, as is interestingly Nigeria as well. Although Ghana is on the more on the freer end of the spectrum. Although, as you mentioned, Eva, there have been a number of cases of investigative journalists finding some form of harassment or threats or acted upon threats as well in that environment as well. But it certainly is a big concern in Hopewell Chinono that was sort of at the heart of Eva's story, is a big figure in Zimbabwe and sort of the media landscape, and it's a concerning situation. His arrest earlier this year.
Absolutely. Actually, when Eva mentioned about the intimidation of journalists in Ghana, I was a little bit disheartened, because for a while now, Ghana has been held as the beacon of democracy for Africa. So it's disheartening that what we do look up to for those of us in countries with less free democracies beginning to take such a turn. That's quite disheartening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. Eva mentioned that hopefully going forward, we will not see journalists being put to jail just because they're doing their jobs. But unfortunately, this has been going on for a very, very long time. And in some parts of Africa, in some African countries, that is met with impunity. You have governments that do what they want. They will just throw some in jail because of an article they published, and there won't be any consequences to that, because that is the problem. For us to get to that place where we sort of start to see a difference in how journalists are treated, there needs to be a change of mindset that journalists are not the enemy. Because for a lot of politicians, a journalist is the enemy, but they're not. They are there to inform society. They are there to keep people educated and in certain instances entertained. And so that change of mindset needs to happen across society with politicians, but also law enforcement. Because the people that throw journalists in jail are the police, because they just play along. There needs to be that change of mindset within law enforcement, within our government, but also within society, to start seeing journalists as part and parcel of a free society.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that a lot of times governments criticize journalists for being unprofessional or not doing their job enough. And things of that nature. You hear that type of discussion taking place. But at the other hand, when you see these very professional journalists doing these great investigative reporting, you also see that they're also treated in some sort of derogatory manner, right? And I like how you put that, Gloria, that there needs to be this sort of rapport that is developed between the government and journalists and the media. Now, there's always going to be that tension, right? I think there's always going to be that tension, regardless if you're not a democracy or you're sort of a democracy. There's always that tension there, right? We see that sort of pointing out the press and they're being too hard and they're asking the wrong questions. That's always going to be there. But again, it's about coming up with that rapport. And I think it's also not just about the rapport between the government and the journalists that's important, but the journalists and the broader public, right? Yeah. And that trust that needs to be there. And a lot of folks have looked at sort of this issue of trust in the sort of in journalism and in the media more broadly across the globe. And it's been overall in many countries on sort of the decline, right? Because they see that some journalists are not professionals. Some journalists are not checking their stories. Some journalists are not, going about the practice of their trade with the ethical standards that they need to, right? But I think at the same time as that may be the case with some journalists, the prominent journalists, those who are doing a good job, need to make sure that they're reaching out to the mass public, engaging people, and I would argue also training a new generation of journalists, doing that kind of outreach work that needs to be there, such that those bonds of trust are there, so that we have not only better rapport between government and journalists, but also the public and the journalists as well. So I just building on that good thought there, Gloria.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Oh, you can go ahead, Ghana.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we may need to pay attention to is the online media platforms, news media platforms. There have been a lot of concerns about the quality of information, unverified information that is coming through many of such platforms. And that might probably be affecting, the public support for journalism and for journalists. Because to me, that might be a disservice to the quality work being done by folks who are involved in real investigative journalism. Because it appears to me that the public is not able to distinguish between this journalism and real journalism, because what many people seem to be doing, particularly bloggers and what have you, is that they just get information, unverified information, and they start sensationalizing this information, sending it out to the news media platform. So, and many of those who are reading in the public, they find it difficult, in my thought, to distinguish between what should be considered as news and what shouldn't be considered news. Because many might have been on the side of some of this misinformation circulated through such platforms, then it might be affecting, the public support for journalism and for real investigative journalism. And that might also mean that politicians or those at the receiving end of investigative journalism work might be saying, after all, you people, that there has been a lot of misinformation out there, that I'm just another victim of information, whereas that may not be. So, and I think, to me, going forward, this is one area we all need to work on, so that such disinformation, mechanism of disinformation, won't be affecting the credibility and the good work being done by folks who are engaged in investigative journalism.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Violet, can I change my top three now? I want to make an adjustment, or at least an amendment. I feel like I should have put number one or number two, misinformation or disinformation, very high on my list, because as you sort of alluded to, Ghana, I think this is one of the big stories of 2020. And I know we're going to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, but I think the pandemic, just to preview a little bit, accelerated this concern of misinformation, disinformation, which was already accelerating. It accelerated further in a climate where you need that good journalism, you need that good explanation, that good data, that good communication surrounding issues of public health, right? So we were really confronted with that crisis, and we come up against this misinformation, disinformation that's out there. And obviously, everyone, I'm sure our viewers know the difference between the two, but you see on both sides. So maybe I want to change my list now, Violet, after reflecting on our conversation and putting that somewhere higher up on my list there.
Well, like I said, since it's the end of the year, I'll be gracious. So, yes, Peter, I'll grant your request. And of course, with the internet, I've really been a very big catalyst of misinformation and disinformation, since everyone is potentially a broadcaster nowadays. And Ghana, well, what were the top three stories of 2020?
Ah, man, again, just like I mentioned, it's been a very exhausting year for me, mainly for many reasons. And one of the reasons that actually made it really exhausting towards the end of the year is the third on the list of my top three, which is the fallout of BCCS for Great documentary. You know, this was a massive documentary that came about in 2019. And we were all
It was, and it
excited.
has millions of views.
We were all excited about the fact that somebody, you know, some folks from BBC, they put their lives on the line by going on out to fight this hydra problem that we all are all aware in some of our universities in different African countries, particularly in places like University of Lagos, which all of you are aware of. I'm very, very passionate about. So I've been following the story.
Yes.
You know, Kiki Modi, she won some award for doing what is considered a very groundbreaking documentary. So about 2 or 3 weeks ago, something began to happen very negatively that is making me to think that those of us that are working either directly or indirectly in spaces that have things to do with journalism, we need to begin to question some things that I call the in-house traditions and value, how we make decisions and how those decisions can actually, you know, make life worse for people that are working with us. You know, we just discussed it, journalists being arrested, you know, journalists being harassed by politicians, particularly those that are involved in investigative journalism. The BBC documentary passes for a good work of investigative journalism and very good storytelling. However, the crisis with the documentary is that the person that actually did the work, most of the work, her name is Ogbeshi. So Ogbeshi was formerly a student at the University of Lagos. She was the one that was going about, you know, trying to lure the lecturer to have like, to exchange cells for grade with the lecturer. So, and when we were putting together. So there was this reservation about her. It was said that she doesn't have the guts, she won't be able to withstand the stress associated with the documentary, particularly the fallout of it, the reactions from different stakeholders, particularly folks at the University of Lagos, where a younger brother or sister was actually a student when the documentary was about to release. So, you know, this documentary attracted a lot of interest all over the world, from across the world, and to the extent that Kiki Modi won a lot of awards. But that came at the expense of the happiness of Obuchi, because he was more or less unanimous. Nobody's really aware about this personality. And the sad story is this: she attempted to take her life about 2 to 3 weeks ago. She actually, she took a poisonous substance that led her to being hospitalized. She's recuperating in the hospital, and the story is now being told that she was not properly being treated at BBC. There's that allegation. She said that she's not been receiving any single credit despite doing the whole of the job. And so, as we focus going forward on investigative journalists being harassed by politicians, by other stakeholders in the public space, we also need to be talking about what we need to do right in our organizations where we employ journalists, so that some of these things that are happening won't be happening. But if this lady should lose her life, then what that is telling me is that we have more concerning issues to address within media
Right.
organization, particularly in relation to the issue of investigative journalism. And that leads me to the second story of the year, and that has been the story that is depressed in the mind of everybody, and that's the issue of COVID-19. Uh,
Mm.
I it's been a mix for me, positive and negative. Positive in the sense that I was one of those that was really concerned about how COVID-19 was going to affect Africa. I wrote an article, if many of you could recall about that article that I wrote about, COVID, when and that was going to accelerate the spread of COVID-19 and possibly turn the
Yeah.
continent upside down. Unfortunately, my projections in that particular article never came to be. So it's a kind of relief for me. And not just
Yeah.
about that, I was also worried about the threat of COVID-19 to school children in Africa
Mm.
because,
Mm.
uh, I did my growing up and everything. And, the schools that kids attend, they're always overpopulated in Africa. So I've been so much concerned, but none of those came to me. And the negative part of it is that our world never gave the required commendation to Africa. Because unlike most parts of the world, we've got a lot of things right about COVID-19. We are very much proactive, and we learned from my experience with Ebola, and we did all we could to ensure that the spread of the virus wasn't as deadly as people have projected, particularly in Africa. What we
Mhm.
experienced is that deadlier in other places like the United States, Europe, where people least expected that to take place. And, rather than give us a commendation in Africa, people have been offering all sorts of explanations that I feel that is not being respectful of the good thing we've done. And that would be denying our world the opportunity to ask the question, what could we have learned from Africa in order for us to be better positioned globally fighting the next pandemic? Hopefully, going forward,
Mhm.
we are having a lot of conversation about this. And my number one story is about education, is about strike in Nigeria. Many of you may
Mm.
not be aware of this. Public universities in Nigeria, they've been on strike for the past 9 months or thereabouts. They recently called off the strike.
Wow.
Yeah, so because many of my friends they are working in this space. This is the space
Mm.
that have always made me and a good number of us, and has always been my number one priority. So I've been so concerned for
Mhm.
many. And, the reason for this strike is because they are calling for better funding of university education in Nigeria, particularly a
Mhm.
public system, which to me is long overdue. When I was a student at the
Right.
University of Lagos, we lost a year to university strike. When you combine
Oh.
everything, we lost a year. When I was in the Polytechnic, we also lost about 1.5 years, meaning that 2.5 years of my life was lost to
Hmm.
strike. And that is not counting the
A
other
lot.
factors that go to university.
Mm.
So I would have been thinking a lot about my colleagues, who wanted to go to the grad school in the US, in Europe, and elsewhere. They couldn't make it because their
Yeah.
schools were closed for like 9 months. So I've been so much worried about those folks and what would be happening to them at home. They are not out of school. They can do anything. They can move forward. They can move backward because some of them are about to graduate
Mm.
and they have started. So
Mm.
there is
So,
that concept.
so do these strikes achieve anything? That's what I always wondered because I know I talked about
Mhm.
Cote d'Ivoire earlier today. Cote d'Ivoire has also experienced, periods of lecture strikes and things of this nature. But do they achieve anything tangible in Nigeria? In looking back at the history, because if not, then it seems like this strategy is not very effective. The only thing that it is very effective at is prolonging students sort of need to go back for another year or another semester. And if that is the case, I think one of the things that one has to be concerned of is that students should get their money back for semesters that were incomplete. Because I think
I like
one
that
of the
idea.
potential perverse incentives here is that if everyone goes on strike, you don't have to give education, but students have already paid their fees at the outset, and then they have to go back for another year, right? We already know that
And
some
pay
universities
again.
love to give a high number of credits so that you have to pay a lot of money to do it. So this is one of my concerns: is if they're not achieving things, is this evolving into some sort of money-making kind of scheme for universities where, they'll let the strikes go on for a long time because they know they're still getting that those students, registering and paying their fees and not necessarily getting refunded if they go on strike.
Right, right.
I mean, I love the social justice angle to this conversation that Peter just mentioned, because this is that people have not actually been looking at, particularly the moral dilemma that comes with striking universities and striking professors. But there are two things I'd like to clarify here. When universities are on strike in Nigeria, particularly the public university, that's what they call the academic staff union. That is the body that actually strike, not necessarily the university administration. But that said, I
Oh,
think
okay.
one of the things that a student can do is to litigate the strike itself by demanding that their money be refunded. And if this happens, might be a sort of a game changer, that may force the academic staff union association to start thinking about alternative to strike, because many people are
Yeah.
bothered, parents are bothered, the government are bothered, even the academics themselves in a public university, they are concerned because there are a good number of their children are in these public universities, and they are also being affected. But that said, is it effective? I would say yes and no. It's been effective in the sense that government has been acceding over the years to some of their demands. And the question I've always been asking is that do they need to go on strike before the government does the right thing? I don't think
Right.
so. Because when you look at those in government, their children are not schooling in our public universities. You
Yeah.
see, most of them.
Oh,
Exactly.
see that is the key element. If it doesn't hit home, it doesn't hurt. Then
Uh-huh.
they're
Right.
not going to have a move. But it's kind of interesting you bring that up, because that brings up the larger issue of who these representatives are and how really connected they are to the experience of those who are
Exactly.
receiving public services, who are going to school. Now that little piece of information is critical.
It's crucial, yeah. Absolutely, because I
Yeah,
find that most of our representatives are actually part of the elite. And even if they come from the grassroots, eventually they do become part of the elite, and they eventually disconnect from the people whom they are representing. And there's always that gap.
Yeah, I
I
want
think
to
it
say
should be
something.
mandatory for the children to go to those universities. It needs to be the law, just like they need to go to the same hospitals, because it still happens in healthcare. The families of the elite still have to go out of the country, but billions of taxpayers' money is spent on healthcare, but they don't trust the healthcare systems or the aid systems. What does that say about the services they're rendering? Yes, Eva.
Anyway, Ghana, when I was a kid, we always hear about strike in Nigeria. This has been going on for so many years. I just feel like the professors and the staffs of universities have been striking so much that politicians are immune to it. So they don't really they don't really pay attention. That is why strike in Nigeria drag on. I remember when I was in the university, I had this Nigerian friend, and I asked her, "Why are you in school in Ghana?" And she said that in Nigeria, when I enter, I know the year that I've entered, but the year that I'll complete, I may not know because they may be strike. That was
That's
really
sad.
concerning. And I mean, that was something like they can enter in 2018, and they know that in 2022 they'll finish, but they are not sure. And I actually met a guy who has come to Ghana, and the parents were in Ghana. They are Nigerians but staying in Ghana, and he was in the university in Nigeria, and he has come to his parents' home in Ghana to stay with his parents because the university has gone on a strike, and it was almost like a year. So now the parents were trying to transfer him to a school in Ghana. And for me, I've been hearing this over and over. It's really concerning. I feel like the university staff, together with the students, should come up with a strategy to hold the hands of politicians. For example, in
Right.
Ghana, like this, when there is strike, professors, you have 21 days to call it off, or you have 21 days to negotiate it. If you don't negotiate it, they have to cancel the whole academic year and restart it. So, because there is
Wow.
21 days deadline, most of the time you don't have strike that goes on like extensively. You know, most of the time by 18 or 15 days, the government is sitting with I mean, the union, the teachers' union or the lecturer union to negotiate, come up with something and go back to
Right.
class. So in Ghana, there have been strikes, but most of the strike have not lasted for like more than a month or something like that. And we've not had strike recently because most of the time before even the strike take place, there is a lot of negotiation that goes on behind the scene before when the government their demand before they said that, okay, we are going to strike. But most of the time, the strike is more like a week or 14 days. Then they call it off. Then we all come back to school. So I just feel like because Nigeria has frequent strikes, the politicians are immune. They know that at the end of the day, they don't meet the demands of of these professors and also the staffs. They are definitely going to go back to school. Their jobs are on the line, and also the education of the students are online, so they go back. So I just feel like they need stronger unions. They have unions, right? But the unions have to be strong. They have to be firm. They have to engage the Minister of Education or the politician or whoever is assigned to tertiary education in Nigeria. They have to engage them beforehand, like way ahead of time, to tell them their needs and things like that, so that they also present it to the government to be able to meet these needs. They have to lobby. That is what I would say. They have to be lobby going on at the presidency for education in Nigeria. Because if every year or every other year there is strike, then it means that if they are not firm in their negotiation or they don't really lobby for things to be done for them, politicians will be immune to their problem. They will not do much about it. So.
Mhm.
Yeah,
True.
that was a very beautiful point, Eva. And I think, in fairness to them, they've always done this. They've always placed their demand before the government. We may have concern about how they've been going about their things, but I think one area they've actually failed is to enroll parents, the public into this competition. And they have also made it an electoral issue, because every 4 years we go to the ballot and we elect the leaders. And I'm not aware of a time that education has been the number one issue on the ballot. Rather than making
Wow.
religion one issue on the ballot, rather than make the issue of corruption number one issue on the ballot, I believe also we do better if they make education funding, public universal education funding, the number one issue on the ballot. And they have a leverage.
Right.
A good number of the population in Nigeria, they are youths. And these are youth across different tertiary institutions in the country. So if they only hit convert this into a political capital, then they may be able to turn the table around. And this is one area that they have a lot of things to do. And for them to do this, they need to do a lot of trust building. Because many times people are even concerned about these professors. That these professors,
Right.
some people look at them as corrupt individuals. You guys may be aware of what happened at the University of Lagos, where the Vice Chancellor, somebody that I'm a little bit close to, we've done a lot of things together. We have a lot of respect for one another, but it's been in the bad end of the news for the most part of the year. There have been allegations of corruptions against him, for which he was suspended by the University of Lagos Pro Chancellor and the council member, and at the end of the day, he was being reinstated. But up until the time we are speaking now, there are damning allegations of corruption, mismanagement of university fund by the current
Wow.
Vice Chancellor of the University of Lagos. that is waiting to be prosecuted by the Economic and Financial Crime Commission in the country. And even the visitation party that came to review his suspension by the council also indicated in their own white paper reports that he has damning cases of financial misappropriation. And it's not just about the issue of Lagos, it's also about other places too. In other universities, we have a number of vice chancellor, we have a lot of polytechnics that their heads, they have issues of financial scandal or dangling here and there on them, and there are issues of lecturers not coming to do their job, sleeping around with students for grade. So there have been this issue of trust as well that they need to address and to be able to get the sympathy and the massive support of the public to make education number one issue on the ballot. If they do, if we do, I think we may have a lasting solution to the problem of strike in professors and universities in Nigeria and elsewhere in Africa. And to me, this is what I look forward to in 2021. I'm praying that they won't have to go on strike again because everybody is worried that by February they might be back on strike. If they do, I'm concerned. Even the professors themselves, they were not paid through the strike. So they have to be begging, friends, soliciting family support. I know what this means on them. Poorly paid colleagues. The salary of a
Absolutely.
professor is not up to $1,500 put together. So we are not talking about a junior lecturer, lecturer one. We are not talking about lecturer two. We are not talking about readers and all of those. They are poorly paid. And if somebody
Right.
is going to be money for like 9 months, so how are they paying their rent? How are they feeding their family? How are they taking care of their basic life necessity? So I'm really worried about this issue because at the end of the day, the progress of a country, to me, it has always been the function of the education.
On the
in that
teachers.
particular. That's where I'm going to
Wow.
end with the first 3 items for today, for the year.
That's deep. Ghana, that's really deep. And you've touched so many salient issues. And like you said, the success of any country rides on the backbone of its educational system because that's where all the doctors and engineers and all the other brilliant people come from. So absolutely.
I will say one thing. Before we move on. I think when it comes to education, there also has to be a clear way forward for what one does with their degrees or their qualifications when they do become educated. Because as we know, there are many folks who are, and we've done some sessions this year from leaders of Africa on this issue of youth unemployment, and particularly postgraduate unemployment. So I think one of the key movers of increasing investment in education come from the fact that there are opportunities to apply those skills and that knowledge in a tangible way. And I think that argument also needs to be made alongside the argument for education, which I fully agree with your thoughts, Ghana. Yeah, go ahead, Violet. I just want to jump in on that one.
Yeah, well, so Gloria, what were the stories that mattered the most to you this year?
Wow, as all of you have said, there were many stories this year, so it's hard to actually come up with 3. But I am going to focus on, first of all, entertainment. So there were 2 movies we actually discussed on this show this year. One of them is Cuties. Cuties is the movie. I'm sure you all remember this movie. Yeah,
absolutely.
It was directed by a Senegalese filmmaker, and it was talking about the sexualization of young girls. This movie created a lot of controversy around our modern culture, a lot of controversy around immigration and that the influence that has on changing culture in our society. And but the problem that came up with the movie is that while telling these important stories, talking about a very important issue in our modern culture today, the filmmaker used some very explicit scenes and of very, very young girls. And so there was a lot to talk about, and I still believe that that movie played a very important role this year in bringing us face to face with our modern day culture, the things that we have come to accept, the things that we see every day, but sometimes we just look away. But this movie gave us a chance to talk about it, to discuss. It was very uncomfortable for a lot of people, I'm sure,
Yeah.
but the more we talk about this issue, the more we become aware of them, and the more we can think of solutions on how to protect our young children as they navigate a
Right.
very changing culture. So that movie did a lot in getting people to talk about this involvement of children.
That it did.
Yeah. The second movie we talked about a few weeks ago is Lady Bucket and the Muppet Mobsters. Very
Yeah.
interesting story. I haven't watched the movie, I must say, but the thing that touched me personally the most is the backstory of how this movie came to be. How the filmmaker had to explore different options to make this movie. Came to America, Asia, and all these places. But at the end, Africa produced this movie, and so this story was very encouraging in so many ways. In that this is Nigeria's first 3D feature-length animation movie, and the
Yeah.
talent came from our continent. And it was very exciting to see that come to pass, and also the door that this movie has opened for future, movies, and just the future that Africa has in terms of entertainment in the area of animation, and
Mm.
who knows. So yeah, those are the two movies I wanted to highlight.
That's a good one, Gloria. And if the producer Blessing has an opportunity, we'd love to see a copy or something of that nature so we can watch here, because I know it premiered just a couple of weeks ago, but in some cinemas in Nigeria, and I haven't seen any place where we can get a hold of it, but I know that Blessing did like our video when we did talk about it on this show,
Oh.
which was very cool. So if she has a way of distributing it internationally, we'd love to see it. It would be really fantastic.
It was actually
Absolutely,
supposed to
I would
premiere
love
in
to
the
see it.
US and in the UK. I just don't remember the dates. So
Oh,
maybe
really?
that's when we might have a chance to see it. Yes. But it would be nice to have a copy or find a way to see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally agree. I can't wait to actually see this movie. I've just seen some short clips, trailers online, but I would love to watch it, like all of you. All right, on to my second story. I looked at the uprising in Namibia in October. We had women taking to the street, and men as well, taking to the street in
Mm.
Namibia in the protest which was called Shut It All Down. This protest was rising against gender based violence in Namibia. In a way, though,
Right.
this story is the story of 2020, is the story of COVID, is the story of lockdowns, because reports kept coming up that gender-based violence increased during the COVID-19 lockdowns. And this is not just specific to Namibia, although Namibia has a, a very long story with gender-based violence, especially between intimate partners. But we saw these trends
Mm.
going up in different parts of the world where people had to shelter in place with their partners, women started experiencing even increasing violence. And people took to the street in Namibia with the aim to bring the country to a standstill, to force
Right.
politicians to actually do something against the killing of young girls. What triggered the march in Namibia was the killing of a young woman in her 20s. Her name was Shannon Waterfall. The police found her remains in the dunes in Walvis Bay, and so people just couldn't stand that. So they took to the streets and started bringing attention to this very issue. As I said, the issue of gender-based violence just got worse in the year 2020, and I am
Absolutely.
I'm sure and I'm hoping that work will continue to be done beyond us working. As we said, protests have their place; they are important, but we need policy, we need action, we need different factions of societies coming together to address this issue.
Mm-hmm.
And my first story, COVID, we've talked about it already, but there's just so much to be said about what COVID brought. Most of it
Right.
negative, people losing their lives, people losing jobs, and all of these just crazy things happening. But also on the flip side of it, we saw this COVID season bringing a lot of creativity, a lot of imagination coming from different parts of Africa. We talked about earlier during the year in Senegal, how Senegal created these little test kits that were going for $1. We saw
Right.
how people came together to create masks, how people build these water hand washing stations at different corners of different cities. And also,
Yeah.
one of the major developments that came out of this season was the largest clinical trial that is going on right now in 13 countries in Africa, showing how, we may have issues, we may have infrastructures that are still need to be developed, but we have the capacity, we have the talent, we have the resources that when we bring them together, when we think together, really we have the potential to answer some of our issues. And personally, I really look forward to the clinical trial that was launched a few weeks ago. We're to see what comes out of that clinical trial. And
Right.
again, the things that I just mentioned, in addition to the movies that I talked about, especially the animation movie, for me brought a lot of hope. Although 2020 was a very exhausting year, very depressing in some ways, but these particular stories brought a lot of hope for me personally, and I hope it did the same for a lot of people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like you said, it was a very, very exhausting year. But then again, it forced the world to innovate in so many ways. And in a way, it also did bring people closer together again in different ways. So it's been an interesting year.
Yeah, I think there is also another side to this, the pandemic, your number one, which arguably could have been everyone's number one this year because it affected so much. But is this issue of global inequality, I think, that we see, particularly when it comes to the distribution of approved vaccines, right? Those coming from Pfizer, Moderna, and there have been a couple of others as well that are out there. And the talk, generally speaking, is, one of the talk is about the efficacy of the vaccine. And there's some good data that suggests that it is effective, but we're going to even get some more information as days and months move on. But that aside, the issue of the distribution is sort of a broader concern and really highlights these sort of fault lines of global inequity. And so, this talk that African countries, for example, will not have, widespread access to the vaccine or vaccines until not 2021, but 2022 and perhaps beyond, right? And this is nothing new. This sort of sense of global inequality, in particular in public health, has always been there. But I think one of the key things that you mentioned, Gloria, in your top story there, and I believe Eva alluded to earlier, is sort of the development of new technologies and techniques that are taking place on a more domestic level, right, and a continental level. And I think there's a lot to be said for that movement, which requires obviously a lot of capacity to do this kind of trials, to have the regulatory framework and to do all of that. But that aside, I think there is some hope in developing some of these solutions closer to home, in the sense then there isn't this greater dependency on systems that are already unequal when it comes to the distribution. So whether this particular vaccine that's being taken a look at across some African countries actually comes to fruition is significant. But I think the broader issues is in the future, there is this emphasis, there is this capacity that is built that can correct for and help us, confront perhaps more domestically this issue of global inequity, right? And I think the pandemic has been all about inequality. That's what it's been. Global inequity, as we've talked about, but domestic inequity. Those who could survive the pandemic with in the lockdown periods with very little support because they had the money flowing in either from the past or from their employment that didn't require them to be sort of on site and engage in their work activities. And then those that didn't have that opportunity, right? And I think the critical piece that adds to this inequity piece domestically is the fact that different countries had different social safety nets. And I know talking to a lot of folks from Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwean government has been very much emphasizing these lockdowns. But in terms of extra payments and support, the whole social infrastructure that is necessary to sustain that lockdowns wasn't present, right? And so emerging from the pandemic and knowing that that social safety net wasn't there, it is going to have this long-lasting inequity that we see revealed and is going to persist over time. So I think leaders of Africa and all of us on our team that we care so much about sort of social justice and equity issues, I think we're going to have a lot of conversations and very deep conversations about these issues, both on the global level and the domestic level heading into 2021. And frankly, I'm excited for those conversations, but also, not so excited about the fact that we do have these existing inequities that are clearly present.
And to be part of that conversation in this era, it goes back to the issue of the distribution of the fasting. Because I've been reading about the distribution of the vaccine, and there is a case that actually came across to me as very depressing. South Africa is one of the countries where the vaccine is being produced worldwide, but unfortunately, South Africans may not have access to the vaccine for many reasons. Not until like late in 2021 or early in 20. In fact, some people are saying in 2025. Because the thing is, so the vaccine is being outsourced. The production of the vaccine is being outsourced to different countries of the world. And one such countries where the vaccine is being outsourced for production is South Africa. And people have paid, government in developed economy, high income economy, they paid for this vaccine upfront. Like the United States paid for like 800 million doses of the vaccine. And some other high-income countries have paid, about 50%, more than 50% of the vaccine that were produced, even before the production, we are already paid for by countries like in Europe and in the US. And, so means is that when the vaccines are produced from places like South Africa, they have to be shipped to Europe and to the United States of America and other Western countries. And it is from there that after they've, it costs about the money. If you have the money, get a vaccine, and then you're able to vaccinate your people. So, South Africa is a country that is not rich enough, that is not poor enough to be able to get what they call the corporate vaccine. So the corporate vaccine is vaccine that is made available by International Development Organization at subsidized rate. So South Africa doesn't have that luxury. But vaccine is being produced, manufactured right there in South Africa, and South Africans won't have access to that vaccine. And that goes back to the issue of inequality that will be more of that pertaining to the distribution of the vaccine. One way South Africans can have access to the vaccine is to make themselves, available for trial vaccines. Vaccines that the efficacies we don't really know for now. This is one of the ways you can actually get the vaccine. Like in Nigeria now, my country people, every one of us, we are worried, we are concerned about when is the government going to give us information about the procurement of the vaccine. They don't even have the money to pay for the vaccine. And I'm really worried what this means for African countries, particularly that our world is getting to the second wave of COVID-19, which appears to be more deadly. Because when we look at in the case of Nigeria currently, we've recorded a lot of deaths in the last 1 or 2 weeks. Not a lot compared to what is happening in the US, but a lot relative to what we have experienced in the past. The numbers are also going in the wrong direction. So I'm really
Mhm.
worried about the implication of this. We don't have money to buy the vaccine to take care of our people. And we've not invested a lot of resources in Nigeria and in many other African countries to develop our own vaccine. So I'm worried
Right.
what is actually for the future, for our people and in different African countries. That's my biggest concern, this issue of inequalities and the inability of the world to actually look into this. I mean, how do you explain this? Vaccine is being produced in your country, shipped elsewhere to take care of other people, where your people they are left in the dark. You know,
Absolutely.
it can
Ghana, I'm so glad that you raised these issues. And like Peter said earlier, that this leads back to issues of inequality that have been highlighted by the pandemic all year through. And if this is something that we hadn't been paying attention to, this is something that we really can't ignore at this point because it's been exacerbated by the pandemic and it's now clear for everyone to see because the fault lines have now opened up and cracked wide open. And these are stories that really mattered to us, and we could discuss them all day long because they really struck a chord. Unfortunately, we have to bring the show to a close. And because today it was the last show for 2020, we decided to go a little bit over our usual time. And it has been fun doing this again one last time to close the year. And while these have been the stories that mattered to us the most over there are definitely so many more stories that mattered just as much. No matter what your story was, thank you for spending your time with us. It really does make the difference. Do join us again on our next Hangouts on January 5th. That will be 2021, where we'll be discussing the role of technology in the energy sector. We'll be hosting Christian Kaboba, the co-founder of BitHub, a leading technology and research hub based in Kenya. It's going to be exciting and also an opportunity to learn more about some of the cool things happening on the continent. Again, we welcome you to engage with us in the comments or at leadersofafrica.com/live. Join our Discord community, and of course, hit that subscribe button down below to subscribe to Leaders of Africa on YouTube. Also, hit that notification bell so you always know when the new stuff comes out. We wish you a happy and prosperous new year, and we'll see you again in 2021. Until then, stay sanitized, stay sane, and be safe.
See you in
Bye.
2021.
Absolutely.